To start with, my name is Senior Fireman Ray Hawke. I work for the South Australian Metropolitan Fire Service based at Port Adelaide, Station 25. Currently I've been a firefighter for almost 42 years. I started my service back in 1976. Albert Greenman was married to my grandmother, and after his death on the City of Singapore fire, his best mate married my grandmother, so then they had a child, which obviously was my mother, and that's my relationship to Albert Greenman. When I actually joined, I wasn't aware that my mother was a little bit concerned of me joining the fire service back in 1976. It took probably 10 to 15 years for me to find out why she was a little bit uneasy. And then I realised
that the only fire that was a fire, or the dangerous, the sad one and the dangerous one, was the City of Singapore. Well, to begin the story, the boat was moored at the tragedy dock at Port Adelaide, and she was loaded with case benzene. And at 7 o'clock at night, on a Saturday night, the date was April the 26th, 1924, and at 7 o'clock at night, smoke was seen coming from the porthole. And immediately they got a message to the Port Fire Brigade, and the Port Fire Brigade turned out with their appliances and also turned out their fire float, an old one that they had. And after working for about 3/4 of an hour, they found out that the fire was getting away from them and they wanted assistance. So they rang the head fire station and got onto the chief officer, who immediately rang the bells and assembled all the men together in the engine room, where the deputy chief officer, Mr. Cooper, took over. He lined the men up and told them that they would be going on a very dangerous mission. He told them that those men that went may never return. He told them all about it, and he slowly picked the crew, 4 men, a driver, and an officer. The officer's name was Mr. Tom Sayers. The driver's name was Albert Greenman, who never returned. He was my roommate. He had the side of his head blown off.
The way you went about fighting fires, and especially ship fires, back then was different. They didn't have things like foam to smother the fire. They had to flood it with water. And that was part of the problem, that the flames went out, but the heat was so intense that the gases built up. Eventually, an ignition source from somewhere caused an explosion, and that is what killed Albert and the other 2 firefighters. What I found kind of sad was he'd been buried in the grave, unmarked grave, and virtually no recognition. Certainly there was a plaque at the Fire Brigade headquarters, and he'd been written about in a couple of books, but that was it. I found out that he was a returned soldier from the Western Front, so he'd seen the horrors of war as well. And then at around about age 30, he was killed in this horrific ship fire at Tragedy Dock at Port Adelaide. And then I discovered his infant son, who was born some months after he was killed, died at 6 weeks, was also in the grave. And to top it off, his mother-in-law, his wife's mother, was also buried in the grave. So there's people in the 3 bodies in the grave, and not one sign of recognition. And I thought that was kind of sad, and something should be done about it. While it's encouraged by the cemetery to have some recognition on the grave, it has to be done in, if you like, in keeping with the history heritage and with the historic aspects of the precinct. And I've been working with the West Terrace Cemetery Authority. The people there have been exceedingly helpful, and we've been able to at least come to an understanding of what could be done. Now it's a matter of getting all the parties together, raising the money, and getting a tombstone and surrounds on the grave.